The Unforgiving Montana Frontier, 1878. Dawn had barely broken over the eastern ridges when Lawson found the runaway shivering behind his stable, covered in dirt, sporting a busted lip and clutching a heavy Colt .45 in trembling fingers. Leveling his repeater deliberately, he muttered, "You actually gonna fire that thing? Or just hug it for moral support?" Her frantic gaze snapped up. For a heartbeat, he fully expected hot lead to fly. Instead, the tension drained from her frame, taking the heavy iron down with it. "Not looking to rob you," she rasped, her throat sounding like splintering timber. "Just resting a minute." The rancher studied her oversized footwear, a shredded jacket sleeve, and a fresh ranch brand seared into her skin. Yet her gaze remained sharp, exhausted, sure, but intensely focused. "What do they call you?" he pressed, keeping the weapon raised. "Della Orvin." He exhaled, finally dropping the barrel. "Want some grub, Della?" A single nod was her reluctant, prideful answer. Lawson tipped his chin toward the cabin. "All right then, let us put some meat on those bones." His homestead lay 9 miles down from Helena, hidden between parched ridges and thick pine woods. A peaceful retreat built for solitude, until this branded stranger arrived carrying dangerous, unspoken secrets. Stepping indoors, the scent of stale stew hung in the air. The rancher served up a portion, keeping his mouth shut. She devoured the food like a cornered beast starved for weeks. Scraping the tin clean, she sat back, her face hardening into a defiant mask. "I never took those funds, nor the mare. The boss's boy vanished, and I was the easiest scapegoat." The older man carefully scrutinized her expression. "Who is chasing you?" "Fort Benton's lawman, and whatever posse bought his lies." He gave a grim nod. "Got any family?" "Nobody who cares." Lawson massaged his temples. He never wanted this kind of trouble. His days were for driving livestock and repairing wire. Yet witnessing how desperately she clung to that six-shooter, like a literal lifeline, had struck a chord deep inside. "I am not in the business of hiding fugitives," he stated with caution. Della shot up, fury reigniting her stare. "Guess I will hit the trail then. Never said I was kicking you out either." He locked eyes with her. "Any good with that iron?" "Hardly." "Time to figure it out then. I will show you." Her brow furrowed. "What is the catch?" He paused. "Let us just say I am familiar with carrying another man's sins. Plus, wandering back out there right now is a guaranteed death sentence." She slowly took her seat again. Growing up, the rancher had planned on an early wedding, raising a few sons and living out a calm, predictable existence just like his old man. Then the winter sickness claimed his bride 3 years back, leaving his dreams of fatherhood as nothing more than lingering ghosts. For 3 evenings, the runaway bunked in the stalls. Even freezing temperatures could not force her indoors. He respected her boundaries, quietly dropping off hot grub and thick quilts after dusk. Come the 4th twilight, she appeared at the cabin threshold, nervously clutching her brim. "I will not be a burden for much longer," she muttered. "You are staying until you can handle a threat," he countered, "however many days that requires." Target practice began out back. He lined up empty glass on wooden rails, observing silently as her every shot went wild that initial afternoon. Swearing softly to herself, she refused to throw in the towel. By Wednesday, 2 targets shattered. Approaching Sunday, her draw speed was genuinely terrifying. "Keep improving like this," he remarked, "and you will outgun any boy I ever dreamed of raising." She glanced his way, a rare flash of genuine warmth melting her hardened stare. "Care for a taste?" he gestured. I obliged. A heavy silence followed, yet the entire atmosphere suddenly transformed. Soon, the woman took up homesteader chores, tossing hay to the mustangs, mending wire fencing, and inspecting snare lines. Every motion betrayed a lifetime of brutal labor, driven by a soul that never knew true sanctuary. At dawn one day, the rancher spotted her resting on the veranda, cradling his weathered repeater. The morning sun caught her features differently. The raw panic of a cornered animal had faded. "I walked the straight and narrow once," she murmured. "Scrubbed plates up in Fort Benton, hoarding every cent for riding gear, until some local kid vanished, and the whole town pointed fingers, claiming I stole both mare and cash box. The fool was found 3 days later, blind drunk one settlement over, yet the lawman had already painted a target on my back." He settled onto the planks beside her. "Playing the outlaw is the only path I understand anymore," she breathed out. "You ain't no criminal, Della." She blinked hard. "You say that with absolute conviction. Because I finally recognize your true spirit, a survivor with a pure heart. All it takes is one person to actually trust in that." Pivoting sharply to face him, she demanded, "What reason do you have to show me mercy?" His unflinching gaze met hers. "For the simple truth that life dealt you a rotten hand, and you're worthy of far more." She held his gaze, her chin quivering slightly. "Speak enough words like those, and I just might buy into the delusion." Extending an arm, he gently grazed her knuckles. She stood her ground, accepting the touch. By nightfall, she brought her belongings inside the cabin, entirely without discussion. Dropping her meager sack near the entryway, she claimed a seat for supper, as if she had lived there forever. Barely a month passed, when a lone horseman approached along the dirt path. The rancher spotted rising dust clouds miles before the stranger hit the property line. Gripping his repeater, he strode out the front door. The Fort Benton lawman swung down from his saddle, spurs scraping stony earth. "Hunting a fugitive on the run," the badge-wearer announced. "Got a bounty on Della Orvin." The homesteader maintained his icy composure. "No such woman around these parts." Squinting hard, the lawman challenged him. "You willing to bet your life on that?" The rancher closed the gap. "Best point that steed back where you came from, lawman. Nobody matching that description breathes on this land, and nobody who requires your harassment." The badge-wearer slowly scanned the stables, then fixed a cold glare on the main cabin. "Hiding an outlaw makes you guilty too. Next time I ride up, I am bringing a posse of 5 armed deputies." "Feel free to try," the homesteader warned. "Just make sure to drag a pine box along with you." The lawman spurred his mount away. Peering through the glass panes, the woman observed the standoff, her fists squeezed bone white. "Telling falsehoods for my sake was completely unnecessary," she remarked afterward. "I never spoke an untrue word," he replied calmly. "That hunted phantom he seeks does not exist anymore. You evolved past her." She closed the distance between them. "Only thanks to your kindness." Staring down into her eyes, he countered, "No, because you finally permitted your soul to heal." Lifting a hand, she traced the rough contours of his cheek with feather-soft fingertips. She breathed his name as he audibly gulped. "Yeah, I reckon my heart is entirely yours now." A genuine, lingering grin spread across his face. "Looks like we share the exact same peril." She pressed her lips to his, right there on the timber deck, as howling frontier gales swept past the setting sun. Her silhouette melded into his embrace, finding the sanctuary she was always destined to claim. In that fleeting moment, the weary rancher finally dared to believe a tomorrow was actually worth fighting for. Spring thaw had heavily flooded the narrow stream running just past the upper grazing fields, turning the shores into deep, dark mud. With pants hiked up and footwear discarded on dry land, she waded straight into the freezing current, gripping a metal bucket tightly while keeping her fabric clear of the swirling depths. The rancher observed quietly from the perimeter timber, resting a spurred heel on the bottom beam, his chest shielded by folded arms, and his eyes hidden beneath a weathered Stetson. "You planning to haul in supper with that tin, or merely washing away its sins?" he hollered through the crisp frontier air. "Drawing it yourself sweetens the pull," Della countered, her voice parched but unflinching. Hardly a fair claim, considering you march me out to this well daily. Lawson vaulted down. I requested that chore exactly one time. You just kept at it. Sloshing the freezing liquid into the corner cask, she wiped her damp palms across her denim trousers. Frost nipped her knuckles raw. He caught the subtle, aching flecks of her joints. Winter blizzards hit in 2 months, he warned. The river freezes quicker. You require thick mittens. Gazing away, she whispered, I owned some once. Abandoned. He paused, expecting an explanation, yet she remained utterly tight-lipped. Strolling toward the cabin shoulder to shoulder, a comfortable quiet settled over the rugged trail. Brutal gusts whipped her tied hair. Whenever their boots aligned, heavy leather dusted against canvas. Indoors, a cast-iron pot steamed gently. Without uttering a syllable, Lawson filled twin mugs. Taking chairs, they dragged out the moment, playing entirely oblivious to the heavy atmosphere. Circling the mug's edge, Della probed, Ever contemplate riding out? Lawson gave a slow negative. Packed up once. Headed down toward the border at 20. Reached Nebraska plains before aching for whistling timbers and fresh wells. She drank with caution. I firmly believed vast mileage was the ultimate cure for my soul. Yet fleeing merely withered my spirit down to absolutely nothing. You halted that flight, he countered. Staring deeply, she confessed, hardly convinced of that, merely collided with a place I refused to abandon. Emotion choked his airway. Name your price, Della. Freedom from waking up terrified of bounty hunters dragging me away. Furthermore, she uttered, I desperately must outgrow the vicious rumors they slapped on my name. You absolutely are. I crave strolling Main Street as a normal citizen, rather than a walking threat. That day is coming, he swore softly. Not from their shifting minds, but your own. Silence lingered, though fresh resolve sparked in her gaze. Later they patrolled the Sunset Ridge. Spring thaw uprooted the wooden perimeters, allowing a lone longhorn to wander dangerously deep into the surrounding timberline. Wielding a birch branch and a soothing tune, Della herded the beast, her stallion obeying flawlessly despite their brief partnership. Ever tame wild mustangs? Lawson inquired on the return trail. Nope, though I survived getting bucked off. Double points. A genuine chuckle erupted from her, the very first unguarded joy he'd witnessed. Hearing it resurrected a dormant ember within his chest, glowing fiercely comforting and deeply anchored. Hitching their mounts by the stable, Lawson tackled a splintered corral board. Promptly retrieving his mallet, Della cradled the iron spikes silently while he repaired the damage. Reckon the local lawman returns this way? She questioned, scanning the dusty horizon. Should the badge appear, his prime suspect remains a ghost. She paused, nervously. Dragging you into ruin terrifies me. I have faced a firing squad for pettier offenses. Raising his brim, their eyes locked. You are not a burden. Closing the gap, she murmured, Careful with sweet talk. I could actually believe it. He kept his hands holstered, merely observing her intensely, letting the tense frontier breeze communicate absolutely everything. Remaining rooted, she held her ground. Later, she bypassed him entirely to ignite the lamps. Taking charge, she arranged the cutlery and dished out the thick venison stew. Chewing in mute harmony, she finally announced, Town is hosting a Sunday parish gathering. Cocking a doubtful brow, Lawson pressed. Intending to attend? Still deeply undecided. Rotating the silverware nervously, she proposed, Perhaps, assuming you escort me? Silence was his immediate response. Cross that threshold, and we ride out together, he vowed. Surprise flashed across her features before she silently agreed. Behind them, flames snapped while brutal gales battered the cabin roof. Yet within those timber walls, absolute calm prevailed. Supper finished, she joined him by the glowing embers. Always figured romance was just a con, she confessed, just a hustle people used to survive. Meeting his steady gaze, her expression shifted. Lately, I reckon it is actual labor." He raised an eyebrow. "A decision, you mean?" He gently took her fingers, feeling scars that mirrored his own rugged palms. "Then we decide to make it real." Wordlessly, she rested against his shoulder, finally finding peace. Silver moonlight breached the jagged peaks, and for the first time since childhood, her desperate flight was truly over. Their inaugural ride into the settlement smelled heavily of wet earth and sharp timber. Though her fists remained relaxed, he noticed the rigid posture of her spine. She kept her chin up, scanning every shadowy boardwalk and lingering stare with a survivor's paranoia. They pushed onward. Nobody blocked their path. Locals acknowledged him, offering her only nervous, sideways glances without outright hostility. The streets remained hushed. Hitching their mounts by the general store, he silently gestured her inside. The interior offered a cozy refuge, thick with sweet syrup and hearth fires. Towering displays of milled grain and kerosene filled the cramped space, alongside woven fabrics radiating frontier discipline. "Going to check on that fencing," he murmured. "Want something?" Her eyes drifted toward the haberdashery. "Could use some heavy tarp. My old gear is falling apart." Acknowledging this, he vanished down the aisle while she navigated the crowded floor with cautious precision. The matronly proprietor, sporting gray hair and weather-beaten knuckles, eyed her from the till. "You belong to Neil's outfit." Her expression remained stone-cold. "I just tend his property." The merchant squinted, showing rough but genuine curiosity. "Seems you mend things fine." Snapping the fabric tight, she sliced and folded it briskly. No interrogation, zero payment demanded. Emerging into the fading light, they found thoroughfares packed with homesteaders arriving for the evening jamboree. By the chapel, a lone musician aggressively bowed his strings. Kids sprinted wildly around the drinking barrels, creating clouds of dirt and echoing giggles. "Holding up okay?" he inquired, securing his leather gear. Giving a brief affirmation, she muttered, "Being idle feels dangerous." "You will adapt." Moving quickly, they grabbed essential supplies, exchanged brief pleasantries with the locals, and hit the outward path before twilight claims the valley. Distant western peaks glowed under a brutal, brilliant sunset. Hours later, she perched beside the breezy casement, deeply engrossed in her repairs. Silently calculating her work, her intense gaze never left the needle. Observing from the shadows, kerosene flickering across her face, he probed, "Always patching broken gear." "When possible," she replied. "Ever consider crafting something fresh?" he challenged. Pausing, she stared back. "Such as?" He tipped his seat onto two legs. "Fresh linens? A proper coat? Maybe something pretty." Pondering this, she whispered, "Never figured I would survive somewhere long enough to bother." "Things change," he countered. Dropping her project, she closed the distance between them. "Peace terrifies me," she confessed softly. "This calm feels like a snare," she murmured. "It ain't," he muttered. "Then what is the catch?" "Just you believing in it." She touched his sleeve. "I do." He stepped in so tight she had to tip her brim back just to hold his gaze. "You ain't gotta bleed to prove you belong here," he rasped. "This is your territory." "Spent years praying to hear those exact words," she breathed. "Never figured the day would actually arrive." His rough thumb grazed her jawline. "Well, it is here." Her lips met his, lingering far longer this time. No desperate rush, just a slow, deep ember burning true, like a perfectly banked hearth. Later, as the stove cooled and endless constellations claimed the pitch-black sky, her palm rested flat against his steady heartbeat. "I aim to carve out a life right here," she whispered. "We are not just surviving here," he vowed. "We are building, plank by plank." Beyond the timber walls, the mustangs stamped, while the gale whispered across the tall prairie grass. Within the cabin, the silence felt heavy, thick with shared breaths, unspoken vows, and true permanency. Not another word was traded before dawn. The deep silence spoke loud enough. The dawn following their town run found Della awake in pitch blackness. Icy timber bit into her soles as she padded across the room, moving like a ghost past her partner. He slept deeply, chest rising steadily, one scarred forearm draped over the heavy wool blanket. Splashing freezing water over her knuckles at the washstand, she stared through the dusty pane. A thick, ghostly fog choked the frozen dirt, blurring the jagged timber corrals and completely swallowing the tips of the wild sagebrush. A lone coyote prowled the timber edge, a phantom in the gloom. Then the mattress groaned at her back. "You are always up chasing ghosts before dawn." His gravelly tone was thick with slumber. She refused to break her vigil at the glass. "Only when my demons start getting loud." Pushing himself upright, the blanket slipping down, he pressed, "What is wrong?" She visibly tensed. Knew an old stable hand from the military outpost up at Fort Benton. Went by Barrick. He witnessed the whole bloody frame job. Knew my hands were clean. Still buttoned his lip. Lawson stroked his stubble. "Why dig up those cursed bones today?" "Because I am dead tired of looking over my shoulder for a phantom crime. I need to put this ghost in the ground permanently." He crossed the floor, gripping her shoulder. "You aiming to backtrack?" She gave a slow nod. "Ain't looking for bloody vengeance, just need his reason why." Once midday hit, their mounts were rigged out with heavy gear and rations for 2 days. This brutal trail dragged them dead east through sunken valleys, bypassing treacherous waterways toward the sweeping plains. Conversation died out on the trail. Words were just wasted breath out here. Thundering horseshoes and the relentless howling drafts whipping through the dead brush provided the only soundtrack. By dusk, they struck a rough camp near a shallow curve of the Marias River. She gathered deadwood while Lawson rigged the heavy canvas tent. Striking steel to stone, her scarred fingers expertly nurtured a tiny spark into a roaring campfire. As the welcoming blaze finally roared upward, she sank back into the dirt and muttered, "Reckon spineless cowards like him ever lose sleep over the carnage they leave behind?" He methodically scraped the bubbling iron skillet. "A rare few. But mostly, if it ain't their own blood spilling, they wash their hands." She dipped her chin slowly. "Used to be a decent sort. Handed me his own mittens when the blizzard cracked my knuckles open. But when the hammer fell, the coward would not even meet my gaze." Passing the hot tin dish, he asked, "What is your move if you corner him?" She glared hard at the embers. "Haven't decided." They chewed in silence, the crackling logs masking their tension. As the night sky finally ignited, resting her skull against worn leather, she watched the flames dance across the steel of Lawson's whetstone. "Could be a ghost town by now," she murmured into the dark. "Even if we find him, silence comes cheap." Locking her gaze onto his weathered face, she whispered, "Then we head back to our own dirt." Funny how the word home still tastes like ash in my mouth. The crackling embers filled his long silence. Scraping the iron one last time, his voice rumbled low. "The deed bears your blood now, Della, regardless of where your boots wander." Her eyelids fluttered shut against the smoke. "I am putting down roots." By dusk the following day, Fort Benton's chaotic sprawl swallowed them whole, bustling with frontier madness. Freight carriages choked the muddy arteries, while a massive riverboat groaned against its mooring lines, vomiting cargo onto the pier via exhausted laborers. She pulled her brim down, vanishing into the collar of her duster. Slicing through the labyrinth of gambling halls and mud, her partner cut a path, weaving behind the anvil sparks and silos to find the rotting corral behind the abandoned quartermaster's yard. A solitary figure lingered by the splintered fence rails, clutching a rusted tine, hunched over and balding worse than her memory served. Barrick. Her boots hit the dirt. While her companion held the reins, she drifted toward the timber, fists buried deep in wool. Recall this face. The ranch hand jumped, terror flashing across his pale features before a grim recognition set in. The phantom herself, in the flesh. He scanned the alleyway like a hunted animal. "This soil is poison for you. I ain't looking to draw iron," she fired back softly, "just seeking a reckoning." The farm tool slipped from his trembling grip, hoping for a confession from a coward. "Hardly," she countered. "I need the reason behind your paralyzed tongue." He dragged a filthy sleeve over his lips. Survival out here means keeping quiet when the wolves are prowling. The lawman's bloodline controls every trade route in this valley. Cross them, and you starve. Closing the distance, she snarled, "So my destruction bought your peace." The man offered only a shameful silence. Exhaling the bitter air, she whispered, "Keep your guilt. I simply required a face-to-face admission. No badge, no gossip. Just the man who watched it happen." He could not hold her stare. "Got a little girl now," she pressed. His head snapped up, fiercely protective. "A pair of them. Imagine the hellfire if they face the nightmare you allowed to consume my life." A violent spasm ripped across his jaw, a pure, unfiltered manifestation of absolute regret. "That ghost haunts my pillows every single night." Tipping her brim, she pivoted and faded back toward her waiting escort. Spurs bit into flanks, carrying them away before twilight swallowed the crooked bell tower. Only the rhythmic thud of hooves broke the silence, leaving the sins of civilization miles behind. "Demons exorcised," he grumbled. Staring into the vast horizon, the plains breeze whipped at her neck. Scars do not fade, but the bleeding finally stopped. 48 hours later, the sanctuary of their homestead appeared. Not a cloud in sight, though the biting chill of the impending winter hung heavy. Stripping the saddlebags took hours, deliberately grounding herself in the reality of permanence. As twilight surrendered to darkness and dying embers painted the cabin walls with a warm amber, he yanked a battered logbook from the iron stove's cabinet. "Got an idea," he muttered, dropping the heavy spine onto the oak. "Creating a dynasty out in this wasteland means we better forge a paper trail." Catching her curious glance, she asked, "Documenting what, exactly?" He flipped to the blank parchment. "Cattle counts, property lines, and our identities bound together." The room grew fiercely intimate. "You playing straight with me?" Unflinching, he replied, "I do not waste breath on empty promises." Bridging the gap, she covered his calloused knuckles with hers. "Make it permanent." He obliged instantly, carving her identity directly beside his own with absolute conviction. The liquid black oxidized beautifully under the kerosene glow. Beyond the timber walls, the howling plains finally surrendered, cloaking the rugged frontier in an unprecedented, tranquil stillness. Ice kissed the prairie far ahead of schedule that season. A ghostly silver chill gripped the quiet prairie dirt. Daybreak found Della outside, clutching her wool shawl. That dead silence lured her now, same as the urge to run blind used to. Her running days were buried. This unforgiving frontier dirt held her boots firm, finally welcoming a survivor's heavy tread. Lawson drifted up, fists shoved deep in his coat, squinting at the bleeding dawn cracking over the distant ridge. Dead silence held. The man never broke the day's first peace. Reading the stillness, she finally shifted her gaze his way. "Time I staked my own homestead." He barely blinked, offering just one slow, knowing tilt of his hat. "Been chewing on that since our return," he muttered. She absent-mindedly rubbed her calloused hands together. "You claimed this territory belonged to me. I need to carve that truth into the soil, not just paper." His hard eyes searched hers. "Got a stretch of ground eastward, past the crest. My old man ran cattle there once. Been a ghost plot for almost 10 winters. Willing to part with it. I would hand it over free." By midday, they were in the saddle, pushing past the high timber where ancient cottonwoods choked the riverbank. Her chosen patch rolled smoothly down to the timberline, Prime, level dirt, perfect for a solid shack and crops. She paced the invisible boundary, heels crushing the brittle, frozen weeds, halting where ancient, jagged rocks clawed their way out of the mud. "Right here," she declared. Lawson dropped from his saddle, boots hitting dirt. Certain about this. She met his stare. Dead certain. For 7 brutal days they swung axes, dragged river rocks, and staked out borders with rough rope. She matched his grueling pace, utterly ignoring traditional women's work. They moved together like a well-oiled machine. Come sundown, they limped back indoors, knuckles bleeding and spines screaming in agony. Yet they still shared subtle, tender brushes, a silent proof of rock-solid loyalty rather than mere desperate lust. At dusk, while scraping the heavy iron pot, Lawson slouched in the doorway, crossing his arms. "Getting hitched ever cross your mind?" She did not bat an eye. "It has." He stepped forward. "And the verdict? If I take another husband, it has got to mean something far deeper than a title. It requires a partner I trust blindly, forging a legacy that survives our bones turning to dust." He agreed silently. "Guess you ought to see this then." Reaching up, he grabbed a tiny cloth package, dropping it on the rough planks. She peeled back the fabric. It held a plain silver wedding band, rubbed slick by decades. "Belonged to Ma," he whispered. "Pa traded for it while raising this homestead. She kept it on through blinding blizzards and brutal famines." She traced the metal. "You absolutely positive?" "Known it since you stared me down," proving raw honesty beat cowardly lies any day. Her gaze locked onto his, unblinking. "Then yes." They tied the knot that November, right before a brutal blizzard hit. A traveling reverend rode down from Helena, shivering in thick wool and gripping a battered, leather-bound scripture. They said their pieces under the dead trees, watched only by restless mustangs and 2 isolated settler families. 0 fancy trimmings. Just a practical, faded blue cotton gown on her back, him wearing his stiffest jacket, both swearing ironclad oaths without skipping a beat. By midnight, they huddled near the dying, glowing embers. She let her exhausted frame lean heavy onto his shoulder. "Never figured I would wear a man's ring a second time," she confessed. "You ain't just anyone's," he countered. "We belong to each other now." She shut her eyes tight. Hearing that brings peace. Soon, the harsh frontier life found a steady, predictable heartbeat. Her new homestead took shape, log by heavy log. Despite her fierce intent to work her private acreage come spring thaw, she always rode back to his bed by nightfall. Breaking bread and fixing gear became their ritual, often sitting without a single word, finding deep comfort in the quiet. When the harsh freeze hit, she corralled a few chickens and a pair of livestock, tracing crop lines through the heavy drifts. He hammered together a timber trunk for her grain, bundling her raw fingers in hide during brutal gales. That badge-wearing ghost from Fort Benton never showed up again. The dark truth about the vanished kid finally leaked out, cemented when a written admission of guilt hit the postbox weeks later. Almost overnight, the vicious town gossip completely died down. Locals started tipping their hats and offering proper hellos, trading suspicion for hard-earned respect. Come the spring thaw, she leaned against the timber rail, tracking his stallion uphill, cutting through the slush. Sliding from the saddle in silence, he simply gripped her fingers. "Dirt is ready to sow," she muttered. He kissed her scarred palm. "Reckon we are too." That season they worked the soil as a team, physically anchored together. A rare chuckle escaped her whenever those beasts chewed on her frayed hems. He whittled an oak seat for the deck, giving them a front-row view to the shifting landscape. Decades drifted by. The territory remembered them, and their cabin weathered every storm. Harvests overflowed, and drifters found refuge. Those 2 lone wolves who used to battle the cruel world solo now tackled every frontier dawn as a united front. In time, they raised 2 strong sons and a daughter who learned the value of second chances, the true American spirit of building something lasting from the raw land. Late one sweltering July twilight, she wandered without boots across the prairie toward the bluff, basking in that golden glow. He stood guard where he belonged, rough-handed but radiating warmth. "Ever regret the hand the devil dealt us?" she breathed. He tipped his brim, denying it instantly. "Not since you walked in." She pulled him close for a lingering embrace, realizing this fierce frontier existence had resurrected her soul, anchoring them to this wild earth forever.